Hello and welcome to yet another commentary from King's Comments. And it's been quite a while between our last audio message and this one. But I thought a little time was necessary to sort of look at what's been happening on the front in the Russian-Ukraine special military operation. What we have been seeing over the last 3 weeks that I haven't put out any audio messages is more of a very, very dire situation taking place in the Donetsk area, specifically the Luhansk area, and even the Zaporozhye region has experienced a significant tilt to the Russian side. In the Kharkov region, or the Kharkov Oblast area, specifically in the Volchansk area, what we have seen is a slow grind of the Ukrainian forces being defeated in the northern part of Volchansk as the Russians have crossed the river into the southern areas. The amount of FAB bomb strikes, ODAB bomb strikes, TOS strikes against Ukrainian positions and superior manpower positions has been bordering on unbelievable. What we have seen in this war is we've seen an increase in the amount of military casualties actually taking place no longer at the front, but at deployment centers, specifically in this area. So, for example, any large formations of Ukrainian soldiers and Western instructors that are training what's left of this conscript army are now getting killed by these bombs and Iskander missiles as they're being hunted and found. And this has been a serious issue, specifically for the West, because what has happened over the last 3 weeks is many of the HIMARS Patriot missile battery systems have been hunted in and around the Zaporozhye region, and presumably those specific munition systems are there to attack Crimea specifically. They've been hunted, found, and neutralized, and that includes the individuals or instructors that come with those systems. We've also heard of Western instructors being among the casualties in Odessa of Iskander missile strikes. And we're also seeing a huge amount of losses taking place on the Ukrainian side in Volchansk. And we have to keep in mind that Russians are taking losses as well. But in the Volchansk area, I believe I had mentioned before that there were only about 10,000 Russians in the Kharkiv area going up against 30,000 Ukrainian forces that were cobbled from other areas along the front or reconstituted through their new mobilization efforts. And what has basically transpired is the Russians have eliminated armor, personnel carriers, tanks, HIMARS systems, Patriot systems, howitzers, you name it, missile defense systems, aircraft, helicopters. They've eliminated and hunted these things, and to great effect, leaving the Ukrainian army with only one weapon, primarily the use of FPV drones, and not enough of them to combat what essentially has become a kill box in the Kharkiv region. And this specific escapade, as I like to call it, has successfully tied up 30 to 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and the casualties in this specific area have been horrendous for the Ukrainian armed forces. And we're also seeing areas in Sumy region where Russian incursions have also created casualties. And the whole idea around these separate kinds of incursions are to tie up Ukrainian forces and to force them into pitched battle in a situation where they do have a serious lack of manpower, particularly professional manpower. So I want to get into that point relatively quickly here. There's a difference between conscripts and professional manpower. Professional manpower are people that know the lay of the land, are battle hardened, understand battle techniques, have training, and understand what you can and can't do in the heat of battle. Conscripts, on the other hand, are typically people that have obviously been conscripted. They don't have the same national interest. They don't have the same urge of patriotism. Otherwise, they would have joined sooner. And these are typically individuals that are quick to surrender, quick to retreat. And this is what we've seen in massive displays along the Eastern Front, which I'll get to in the Donetsk, Avdiivka area. Now, I wanted to discuss about these issues of the conscripts. In the last mobilization drive in Ukraine, about 120,000 new recruits were mobilized. And if we were to look at the casualty estimates right now, the Russians have claimed that about 9,000 to 10,000 Ukrainian casualties have been put onto the Ukrainians in the last week alone, which would suggest that the 30 to 50,000 casualties a month is well within the ability to look at those numbers and say that those numbers are true. Another thing that should come to fruition here is the situation with the cemeteries in Ukraine, and where you can see the different brigades and their battlefield losses, and how they have to be reconstituted. And what we're seeing there is we're seeing no rotation on the line for battle-hardened veterans of the Ukrainian armed forces, those that have managed to survive. We've heard some harrowing reports of Ukrainian casualties in Krinky, which is a battle for these small islands along the Dnieper River in the Zaporozhye region, a very, very unimportant military objective, and it's cost thousands of Ukrainian lives to the point where it's complete wastefulness on the part of the Ukrainian high command and leadership for the way that they've treated the common soldier. The other issue is what's happening in and around the Donetsk area, Avdiivka region, where Russian military advancements are taking place. And these advancements are taking place in areas that were supposed to be heavily fortified, in areas called the Touretsk region, the New York settlement. Yes, you heard that correctly. New York settlement. These are all areas now that are either under Russian control or close to be under Russian control. What we're seeing is we're seeing major encirclement of the Ukrainian army in many, many areas. And the Russians are inching closer and closer in the Luhansk region of complete and total domination in terms of taking back all of the territory in Luhansk. The Donetsk region, there's still some way to go there with respect to Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk. and Konstantinivka. There are still some areas there that the Russians are likely to continue with their offensive with. I don't see any stop to this offensive. And the reason why I don't is because of the vast amounts of material, vast amounts of men, and the ability to rotate those men who are extremely motivated. And what we're seeing on the Ukrainian side is demoralization and a lack of motivation. We're seeing that in areas where you would least expect it. For example, the heavily fortified areas of New York and that whole area around the Touretsk area have been stormed by Russian soldiers, and they have made massive gains to the point where Ukrainian soldiers are retreating in mass. This is also negative from the standpoint that the roads, the supply lines are being cut every which way you can possibly cut them. I also find it interesting that the Russians have taken the eastern part of Chasiv Yar completely, with their flag being raised up to the canal or aqueduct. The western part, we haven't heard much about what they're doing there, but there aren't a lot of high rises in that area. And one would presume with the constant shelling, bombing, FPV droning, that the Ukrainians will soon be forced to fall back or give up or surrender, whatever you want to call it, in the western part of Chasiv Yar. What we do know, however, is that the surrounding hills, areas around Chasiv Yar area have been taken by Russian forces, and the amount of colossal damage to the Ukrainian military is bordering incredible right now. Based off of the mapping channels and some of the Telegram channels themselves, I believe that the FAB bombs have completely demoralized the Ukrainian forces because of the fact that these FAB bombs have been used to eliminate not only supply depots, but also troop redeployment centers. And it means that you're no longer safe in your own bed as you're being redeployed to an area. So even before you hit the front line, the casualty figures in the rear are almost as bad as those in the front. So these bombs, which weren't being used in the first part of this war, or perhaps didn't see any production in the first part of the war, are now being used to horrific effect. And if anyone has seen what a FAB bomb does, particularly the FAB 3000, I would strongly suggest they look that up on YouTube, because the impact almost looks like a tactical nuclear bomb with a huge mushroom plume. But it is a conventional weapon. It's just the largest conventional weapon that I've ever seen being used in this particular way. One of the things that I've also looked at is that I've felt that the Russian aviation, Russian forces in the air, their airspace forces, have basically made the difference in this war. When there were tactical disadvantages and numerical disadvantages on the battlefield, particularly in the Kharkiv area, because the Russian aerospace forces have basically delivered massive bombing to the Ukrainian forces in Volchansk, in the Lipsy area, in the western part of Kharkiv Oblast, making it impossible for them to advance and making it impossible for them to sustain any ground because of the numerical strength. And this is a real problem because manpower is the main issue for the Ukrainian military, and it's always been the issue. And with this issue, it's not going away. So if you stop and think about the massive collapse that's taking place on the front in the Donetsk area and the Kupiansk area, and what's happening with the Russians taking much of the islands in the Zaporozhye region, what we're basically looking at is a situation where the Ukrainian military is likely to collapse long before their government does, long before, they sue for peace. I don't see how this can last another year with these casualty figures. I mean, of course, you can go out and, mobilize more men and women to this effort. But what you're basically doing is you're throwing people into a meat grinder, and this meat grinder will eliminate them quickly. Again, these redeployment centers, these Iskander missiles, these fab bombs, have done probably as much, if not more damage than Russian bullets could have ever done. So this is what's happening on the front. It's just more of the same, except the Russian advance has been more measured in the sense that more land is being taken, more assaults, more daring assaults, such as using tunnels in the New York area, more daring plans in terms of encirclement of the Ukrainian military, and more opportunities to open new fronts where the Ukrainian army is stretched beyond belief. Now, let's just take a look at some of these geopolitical narratives real quickly. And a lot has been made of what's happened with, the West. And right now, the West is on a mission to try to build up its armed forces. The NATO countries are trying to commit to this process of increased defense spending and increased industrialization of their arms and armaments. The inherent problem with all of this is that it's a little too late, considering what's happening in Ukraine. It may be something that can counteract Russia after this, but the shell issue, the shell disparity is an example of this, where Western countries are late to the gate in terms of competing with Russia in the ability to manufacture more shells. And we're also seeing that the ATACMS missiles that were once considered a wonder weapon and the Patriot systems, all of these weapon systems are being jammed. They're being shot down for the most part. And it's proving the fallacy that Western weapons were better than Russian weapons. I think it's pretty clear to everyone watching this war that Western weapons have either failed miserably because of the people that are using them, or they failed miserably because from a technological perspective, they simply just don't have the capacity to do the things that were talked about. And the ATACMS, I think, is a pretty good situation to describe, because these ATACMS were supposed to be able to hit Crimea with force and with consistent ability. And what we've seen is that the majority of these missile systems have been shot down, at least 90% of them. And I think another thing that's important is that the Russian supersonic or hypersonic missile systems have been able to hit Kiev or any city or any command structure or any supply depot with complete impunity. There isn't a missile defense system out there that can stop a hypersonic missile, and there isn't anything out there that can stop the Russian Fab 3000 bombs that have been used to precision effect. I just want to get into the Fab 3000 because this is a monster bomb. This particular bomb, if you can say it, is just horrible to look at. And one can only shudder to think what the casualties look like when those things strike. But one thing that's very interesting is that its accuracy is within 10 meters of the target that it's intended to hit. So this goes to show that these things are being used to devastating effect without putting Russian pilots into harm's way, specifically over the target area. We've seen that used to great effect in the Volchansk area of the Kharkiv Oblast, and we're seeing it being used to great effect in areas where there's a concentration of Ukrainian soldiers or Ukrainian armed forces with their armor. We're seeing that being used. We're seeing more Bradleys, American Bradleys, American M1A1 Abrams tanks being destroyed. Some of them are actually just being ditched. So it's just not looking good. And it would appear that Ukraine right now is probably looking for more money here shortly, because the $61 billion aid package has done absolutely nothing to advance Ukrainian interests on the battlefield. And it's been, put into people's pockets, and it's paid for their civil service, paid the RADA the money that it needs to operate. But for the poor Ukrainian soldiers, it's not allowed for any advancements on the battlefield. And I cannot point to any area along the front where Ukraine has experienced any long-term gains or long-term success, which speaks to the fact that manpower is an issue. So there isn't much more to add beyond that. One of the geopolitical narratives I think everyone is acutely aware of is that there is a move or push to the right in a lot of Western countries, or right of center governments. The American president, Joe Biden, has recently decided to drop out of the presidential race after his disastrous debate performance. And it's quite likely that Donald Trump, regardless of who he runs against, will be the next president. How the Ukraine conflict plays out while he's president is still up for debate, but it's pretty clear based off of the way his son mocked Zelensky and what Trump has said of Zelensky as a con artist and business salesman, always coming to the United States for money. It would be clear that the money train is going to end. And that was going to happen, I think, regardless, because I think people in the United States Congress can no longer continue to sustain this without detrimental impact to their own economy at some point. And this war isn't going well. So one thing that is clear from this war is that this has been a peer-to-peer conflict where money has not been able to solve battlefield conditions, and where battlefield conditions have been dictated by what's happened strictly on the battlefield. And the fact that there is a presence of American AWACS and there's a presence of knowledge of certain things happening, perhaps prior to when they happen, it has had no impact whatsoever on Russia's ability to eliminate the targets they want to eliminate, to cripple their military industrial complex, particularly their energy systems. And it's had no impact on Russia's ability to continue their offensive in ways that are measured. And when I use the word measured, I want to be very careful about that. A measured advance suggests that the Russians are acutely aware of the casualties they're going to take. But more importantly, I believe what the Russians have been doing is following a doctrine, which is taking roads, cutting supply lines, and starving the army. or what's left of that army as they retreat. And this is the right way to fight war. It's the right way to deal with your enemy. All armies need food, water, medicine, and ammunition. And if you deny an army, no matter how good that army is of those things, they will wither away. And what we're seeing specifically in the Turretsk, Makiivka, New York, Avdiivka, and now a new Bakhmut front, what we're seeing in this entire area is we're just seeing a specific pressure being applied to areas that were once thought impregnable, particularly in terms of the fortifications. And due to the fab bombs that have obliterated these fortifications, it's pretty much a fait accompli in terms of land goals and objectives moving forward. And so right now, I think the only option for Ukraine is to sue for peace as quickly as possible. We've also began to see these peace overtures covertly being put out, and Russia dismissing them because of the fact that they will call the terms of the peace. So there's a lot of things to think about here, and until my next audio message, I'm sure that there will be even further developments along the battlefield that will create a situation where we can finally get some positive news with respect to ending this conflict at some point. There has to be some light at the end of the tunnel, and I believe Russian battlefield success is that light at the end of the tunnel. Again, I want to thank everyone for liking and subscribing to this page and listening to this audio message. Without you, none of this is possible. And until then, I'm signing off.